As soon as you're done with your buyer presentation, it's much easier to say, okay, the next step is to sign the BRBC. The real estate agents, if this buyer agency stuff is getting you all wound up, well, it doesn't need to. Hey guys, I'm Brittany with Brittany Hannon Real Estate. I'm a real estate agent, coach, and investor, and I'm here to make real estate easy for you. The last video I did about buyers presentations, you guys loved. And so remember, I do a weekly workshop every Monday at 11:30. Register at the link in my bio. But today I want to talk to you about your buyer's presentation. Let's talk about the big picture of it. I want to help you set yourself up for success. All right, let's get into it talking about buyer's presentations. What's the point of it? What is the big picture? And so it's about relationship. It's about the connection that you're making with your client. Having a buyer presentation is key to being confident in making sure that you can connect with your buyers. Because the reality is, the number one reason to do a buyer's presentation is to build rapport. You're showing your value, and that's one of the main ways that you need to really set yourself apart when we're talking about buyer agency. You need to make sure that you're showing your buyers why it's worth it for them to pay you out of pocket or from the closing costs or whatever it may be. You have to show your value and your worth. And so doing a buyer's presentation does just that. So let's talk about setting you up for success. The purpose of a buyer presentation is actually to find out the buyer's motivation. Now that's just a little piece of it, but that is a piece of this buyer presentation. We want to find out the buyer motivation. And the reason for that is because buyers could be motivated for lots of different reasons. A buyer's motivation could be because they are done renting and they want to move into a new home. It could be because their parent is needing to get out of the situation they're in and they need to find a multi-generational house. It could be because all of their kids have gone off to college and now they're empty nesters and they need something a little bit smaller. It could be because they have a 2-story house and they want a single-story house. Whatever the reason is, every buyer has a different motivation. Finding out their motivation is going to be key to actually figuring out where to go from there. So when you talk about your buyer motivation, it's really about determining the conversation. Where does the conversation go and flow? Because it's not just about knowing, do they want 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms? It's about knowing the backstory, understanding why they do not want a pool if they have kids, or why they absolutely want a pool because they grew up with a house with a pool and all the neighborhood friends came over. It's about the backstory. And as you are really getting to the motivation, as you're hearing the backstory, that's when you are building rapport. Remember, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And so you want to make sure that you're building that rapport all throughout this whole buyer's presentation and really throughout the whole transaction. You are basically gaining a friend. Real estate is all about relationships. So make sure that you are confident enough in what you have to offer so that you're not coming across as stale or super rehearsed. But the way to do that is actually to rehearse. So make sure that you're very confident with your buyer's consultation. The second purpose of your buyer presentation is to establish expectations. So this is really important because we need to help our buyers understand maybe what the market is like. Maybe they're going to need to have a lot of patience. In today's market, for instance, there's not a ton of inventory. Inventory is starting to go up, but there's not a ton of inventory. And so buyers need to expect to jump on something as soon as they see it, which is one of the reasons why if they are going to be financing their home, they need to be pre-approved first, because they can't wait to find something and then start the process. They have to make sure, you have to make sure that your buyers are in the position to be able to make a move when they're ready to. Also, when you're establishing expectations, you're establishing the expectations of what they can expect of you. So from you as the agent, what can they expect? Can they expect you to answer your phone call 24/7? Which, by the way, you shouldn't have that. You need to manage your time better. Should they expect that you're going to tell them exactly what to know step by step? Should they expect to have you explain every part of this transaction? Whatever it is, here's where you're describing that. Part of this is really showing your value. You're really setting yourself up as that expert in this field. And so you want to make sure that they understand this very clearly, that they understand where you're going, what the next steps are, if they have any questions, where to go, so that they can feel comfortable and confident moving forward with you. This is also where we help them to understand what is to be expected when it comes to spending their money. So I always want to let people know up front when and where and how they're going to be spending money throughout this transaction. Because a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm going to, be putting a down payment down, the end. Well, the reality is that the first time you spend money is actually as soon as the offer is accepted. Within 3 days, you need to send in an earnest money deposit or an initial deposit. That is usually between 1% and 3% of the total transaction, of the total purchase price. And so if they're expecting not to pay anything until the very end, and all of their money is in an account that takes 10 days to transfer over, they're going to be really surprised when they're getting lots of pressure to get that money in by day 3 of the offer being accepted. So we need to help them understand this. If their money is set aside, if it's going to take a while to get to you, start the transfer process ahead of time. The next time that they're going to be shelling out money is for the inspections. The inspections cost money, and it's for the buyer to pay. The buyer pays for the inspections generally. So you want to make sure that they understand however much the inspections are going to be. In my area, it's anywhere between, $300 to $750, higher if it's a higher end property or a bigger property. So you just want to make sure that your buyer understands that they're going to be having to shell out some money. And then if they want further inspections, they're going to have to pay even more for that. So these are not huge amounts. The earnest money deposit could be a bigger amount. These aren't huge amounts, but it's still something to consider, especially for your first-time home buyers who don't realize that this is the case. So establishing expectations, again, you're building that rapport. You're showing that you're an expert. You're showing that you understand this process. And then the next thing to do is make sure that you explain the market. This is key because when you explain the market, you're, again, showing your knowledge and your expertise, but it's also helping to get them on the same page. So if you tell them specifically what you're looking for, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, or Miss and Mrs. Buyer, or whatever, whoever you are working with, you're letting them know. If you're looking for a turnkey house that everybody else is looking for, it's going to be really hard for you to get something accepted right away. You may have to offer over asking. And that's okay because a house is worth what the buyers are willing to pay for it. So it's okay if you want to offer over asking. It's not a bad deal. However, I want you to be prepared to know that you're going to have to potentially offer higher if you really want to get something. Now, if they're looking for a fixer, on the flip side, you want them to know, listen, we're potentially up against cash investors. Cash buyers almost always are looking for a deal. So that means that you're going to have to come closer to asking price, again, if not a little bit over, to really make your loan stand out. Because if you have a buyer who has a loan and they're not a cash buyer, that is not as great as a cash buyer, even if the cash buyer is offering something a little bit lower. So again, understanding the market that you're in, understanding how long it generally takes, letting them know this is the basic process, that is the key to your buyer presentations. So when we talk about buyer presentations and where to get them and how to create them and what to do, you can get them from anywhere. You can buy them for a couple bucks on Etsy. You can download them from Canva. You can get them from your marketing places. You can get them from your brokerage. They have buyer presentations everywhere, but you want to keep in mind these key elements because these are the purpose of your buyer presentation. These are the things that you want to get across because this is what is going to show your value. And as soon as you're done with your buyer presentation, it's much easier to say, okay, the next step is to sign the BRBC, the buyer broker compensation, the buyer rep agreement, whatever you call it in your area. So it's going to be very easy to say, here's the next step. And here we go. Because I now have already provided all this value. They're going to be very willing to say, okay, let's go ahead and sign it. So if they're not, that really gives you a good insight as to what their motivation level is. If they're not willing to sign anything with you, they're probably not as motivated to buy a house with you. So just keep that in mind and let them know, especially as these changes come, that anybody they go with, even to show one property, is going to have to ask them to sign something. So if they're unwilling to sign with you, just know it's okay, but you can't show them any property until you have them sign, and anybody else is going to say the same thing. But when you do this kind of presentation, it really solidifies your value in their head. So when you do your buyer presentation, the key is to be confident. The key is to practice it. The key is to know your stuff. It is not meant to be a presentation that you read verbatim. It's meant to be basically a starting point of your conversation. So as you turn each page, you can say, here's what this is about. This applies to you in this way. It doesn't apply to you in this way. Let's move on. Any questions? Let me answer them. Next is we sign. That's how it goes. You want to have that level of confidence because people want to work with people who are confident. And one of the best ways to get confidence is by understanding what you're trying to communicate. So make sure you understand that. Make sure you read through all your forms. Make sure you know that buyer's presentation backwards and forwards. Because the reality is you don't have to do a buyer's presentation, but you have to communicate these certain things, or else your clients are really just feeling like they're shooting in the dark. You don't want them to have that feeling when this is potentially the biggest financial transaction of their lives. So I'm here every week making real estate easy for you. Mondays at 11:30 Pacific Standard Time. Join me totally for free. Register at the link in my bio, and we'll see you in the next video. It also is that reciprocation, reciprocity. What the heck is that word that I'm thinking? Anyway, this really is oh my gosh, how do I say this? This really is that reciprocal, okay, I'm just going to leave that out because I can't say it. Apparently, I don't know what I'm trying to say.